I have a Dutch passport, but my mom is from Congo
Okay.
and based in southern Belgium.
Your mother's based in southern Belgium. So how did you end up in
With them. I'm based in Belgium with them.
Oh, you're in Belgium right now.
Yeah.
Okay, what time is it?
12 midnight.
Okay, so what makes you interested in Canadian politics? Foreign
Oh,
policy?
long story. That's a very long story, but I'll send you the link to my YouTube show,
Okay.
and that'll kind of explain everything.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Although Eve still doesn't seem to be here yet, I think, or well, not too many journalists, whether they're from Europe or whether they're from America, cover Canadian politics very critically. And then when I started my program, I thought, okay, I'll cover American politics. Obviously, I'll cover British politics, since they're literally just across the pond from
Belgium. Everyone. Hey,
sorry,
you're
chatting here.
Yeah, sorry to disrupt. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. And this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. And I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And the bulk of tonight's discussion will be on Canada-China with author William Dere. But before that, I thought I would just start with a few little developments on Canadian foreign policy in the last few days that are worth discussing. On Wednesday, B'nai Brith, the apartheid lobby organization, announced a suit against McGill University, against the Student Society of McGill University, and the Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights at McGill, over the fact that they don't want students, presumably forever, ever again, to vote on resolutions upholding Palestinian rights. And basically, they took this suit partly in response to, well, entirely in response, one sense, to the 71% of students supporting a resolution back in March calling on the Student Society of McGill University to divest and boycott corporations complicit in apartheid against colonial apartheid against Palestinians. And basically, since that time, this issue has sort of ramped up with B'nai Brith threatened to, or called on the university administration to cut the funding to the student union in response to this resolution. And about a month later, they actually got the judicial board of the student union to annul the resolution that a strong majority of students had supported. And then there's been a series of interventions from within the campus, protests on campus, outside public letters signed by prominent people. And then a few weeks ago, Roger Waters, before his event here in Montreal, his concert here in Montreal, he did an online rally in support of the Palestine Solidarity students at McGill. And B'nai Brith, in their press release announcing the lawsuit, actually talk about this event with Roger Waters. So basically, the B'nai Brith has just sort of, in this sort of escalatory kind of pattern, where they have got to the point where they're literally trying to block with a provincial court decision, the student union from being able to hold democratic votes on whether they want their student union to McGill's undergraduates want their student union to break its ties to Israeli apartheid. So this is a pretty remarkable escalation of anti-democratic kind of positions. And B'nai Brith has been doing variations of this now for quite a few years, calling on administrations of universities to cut the funding to student unions that allow the membership to vote in support of Palestinian rights. And they're on this campaign of basically trying to sabotage or undermine student democracy across the country. And they said it directly in their press release about this lawsuit, that this is supposed to be a message to universities all across the country. So there's definitely going to be developments on this question going forward. And it's one university campus, but it has quite broad implications for Palestine solidarity across the country, for the ability of the Israel lobby to intimidate and scare student unions, university administration, student groups, etc., against taking up the Palestinian cause. So today in Ontario and in Toronto specifically, it's Simcoe Day, named after John Graves Simcoe, who is considered to have helped in the process of ending slavery in Canada. He was the first lieutenant governor of Upper Canada. What's fascinating about Simcoe, that's usually omitted from his discussions about him, is that he actually led the British forces that tried to crush the Haitian Revolution, the great uprising against slavery in Saint-Domingue. And in the parts of Saint-Domingue that he took control over, that he led, they reimposed slavery. So that's usually omitted from discussions of John Graves Simcoe's relationship to African enslavement, but it's a history that should be marked. And Canadian naval vessels and a number of prominent Canadians, obviously this pre-Confederation Canada, but that they were dispatched to Saint-Domingue when the British tried to suppress the slave uprising. And it's tied into a whole other history of Canada's connection to slavery, the trade of cod to the Caribbean slave plantations. Initially, the French colonies in the Maritimes, and then to Saint-Domingue, it's now Haiti, and then also later on to the British colonies, primarily in the Caribbean. So there's this whole, in my book on Canada and Africa, I actually traced the wealth of a couple of the CIBC and Scotiabank to trading with the slave colonies in the Caribbean. A lot of the wealth was created in that process, and it's probably Canada's most important contribution to the African slave trade, but it tends not to get much discussion. Another anniversary on Haiti that's, I think, worth marking is that it was just the 107th anniversary of the American invasion of Haiti in 1915, which lasted for formally until 1934, but they kept control of Haitian finances for about another decade after that. And the Royal Bank and Sun Life Assurance Company both began in Haiti under U.S. rule and benefited from U.S. rule of Haiti. And of course, this is part of understanding Haiti's situation today is understanding some of this history of or certainly last century of extreme U.S. imperialism in that country. And you find that usually the Canadian government went along with that supporting that American imperialism. Another anniversary that took place this week since the last episode is with regards to the armistice agreement on Korea. So our great Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted out on the 27th, today we honor the more than 26,000 Canadians who fought against totalitarianism on land, at sea, and in the air during the Korean War. Now, the idea that the Korean War was a fight against totalitarianism is a little bit odd, considering that Syngman Rhee, the leader of South Korea that we supported, was a dictator that was responsible for all kinds of thousands, tens of thousands of deaths before the war began. And no one claimed or really claims that he was some sort of Democrat, whatnot. And what happened in the Korean War is that we basically took what was a civil war, and a civil war in part that U.S. and Canadian-backed policy, a division that they created and entrenched. But we basically took what was a civil war and internationalized it to this horrific conflict where 3 million plus were killed, and the Americans stopped bombing the North because all buildings of more than 2 stories have been destroyed. There's all kinds of racism, overt racism reported on by Canadian soldiers, including the stuff that got reported on, including directed against our South Korean allies, rapes, killings, that all mostly got ignored by Canadian authorities or a slap on the wrist, where they were convicted. And so it was the Korean War. It's shocking that today it's viewed as this. The Prime Minister and government officials can kind of portray it as a sort of noble cause. When if you just take any sort of modestly serious look into the conflict, and it was just horrific affair. And what motivated it, right? What motivated it in part was U.S. and Canada's desire to pump prime the economy. Right after World War II, which had gotten out of the Great Depression, there was a demobilization of military and a massive reduction in military spending. And the Korean War provided the justification for military spending partly to rearm and to rebuild the military, but also just to pump prime the economy. It was a military Keynesianism to have public investment to avoid recession. Another part of what motivated the Korean War was the NATO was founded the year before, and oddly, they used the Korean War to justify dispatching thousands, tens of thousands of North American troops to continental Europe, right? Because the idea, what they claimed, was that what was behind the Korean War or North Korea's invasion was the Soviet boogeyman, and basically the Soviet boogeyman was trying to create a war in Korea to divert attention from Western Europe, and so we needed to send huge amounts of troops to be stationed in Western Europe, and those troops stayed for 40 years, or big chunks of them. Canada had troops into the early 90s in Western Europe, partly flowing out of that. And then another background to the Korean War, of course, was that in 1949, Mao's forces won in China, and the Korean War ultimately became a war against China, or with China, Many Chinese troops fought, and I think that that's a good point at which to some of the background to begin the discussion with William Dere, who is the author of the book Being Chinese in Canada: The Struggle for Identity, Redress, and Belonging. And he was a leading activist for 2 decades in the movement for the redress of the Chinese head tax and exclusion act. And I thought it would be good with all that's going on with regards to Taiwan to have William on to discuss the issue. William, are you there?
Yes, thank. Okay, can you hear me now?
Sorry, William. I actually think I muted you
Okay.
by accident. And so just to start off, I thought it would be probably helpful for people to break down China, Taiwan, if you like, relations over the past 6 or 7 centuries, like you did in your recent article, and sort of just break that down first of all.
Okay, I could do that, but I just want to update people on this latest news about Pelosi. Apparently, she is going to Taiwan, and she will be going to Taiwan Tuesday, spend the night, and Wednesday, I guess she'll have breakfast in Taiwan, and then she'll take off to wherever she's going. I think this is just an indication, a classic display of a imperial bully. It's like someone uninvited comes into your house and has dinner with you, and decides to stay overnight and gets to sleep with your spouse. So I think this is what essentially Pelosi is doing. Unfortunately, the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, is in a quandary because she has expressed no welcome for Pelosi to visit Taiwan. But she cannot say, don't come, because essentially Taiwan has no say in this matter, given its subservient status vis-a-vis the United States. So this is a situation that we're in today. I'm not really sure what the Chinese reaction to this report would be, because if Pelosi does land in Taiwan, it will be one of the biggest provocations in recent history. Okay, having said that, because this is another chapter of Taiwan mainland China relations. Getting back to your question, Eve, yes, Taiwan geographically is about 180 kilometers off the coast of settled coming from various.
Sorry, you cut out.
Can you hear me?
You cut out. Yeah, you cut out for a second. If you could just go back 30 seconds or 15 seconds, just to that history.
Yeah, I think my internet is not very stable. Okay, so going back about 5,000 years, there was the indigenous people settled in Taiwan, and then going back to about the 13th century, migrants from Guangdong and Fujian province in the southeast corner of mainland China went over to settle in Taiwan, and they were there for hundreds of years, and then the Dutch and the Portuguese wanted to colonize Taiwan for themselves, and I think the Portuguese called Taiwan Formosa. But the Qing dynasty at that time was able to fight them off. But in the first Sino-Japanese War, the Qing dynasty did lose Taiwan to the Japanese, and so the Japanese occupied Taiwan for about 50 years, up until 1945, when it was defeated during the Second World War. It had no choice but to give back Taiwan to China, and at that time, the Chinese government was the government of the Republic of China under the Kuomintang. It was internationally recognized as such. And the Republic of China was formed back in 1912 after the 1911, I guess you can call it the anti-feudal revolution against the Qing dynasty. But the Chinese themselves were engaged in a civil war between the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang Party of Chiang Kai-shek. The communists won the civil war, and established the People's Republic of China in 1949. Chiang Kai-shek, with his army and over a number of years, about 1 million mainland Chinese mainlanders fled to Taiwan to establish their Republic of China government in Taiwan. And so both the Republic of China and the government and the People's Republic of China government, they both adhere to the one China policy. Both governments said Taiwan is an integral part of China. And I don't think the government of the Republic of China has disavowed this position, even to this day. And so that's where we are at today. And during the 70s, I guess the international community recognized the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of the Chinese people, and that Taiwan is a province of China. The Americans, I think, reluctantly committed to that as well. It was about 8 or 9 years after established relations with the People's Republic. So that's where we are until today. And Taiwan was always used by the Americans as a part of their containment strategy against China, against the People's Republic. Even throughout the martial law years under Chiang Kai-shek, because the Kuomintang imposed martial law from, I guess, 1949, when they first occupied Taiwan with their troops, up until I think 1992. So it's about 44 years of martial law, of military dictatorship in Taiwan. And so, but of course, people are touting Taiwan as the bastion of democracy in Asia, which it wasn't. And I don't know how much it is today, because any pro-China, pro-unification forces in Taiwan are being blacklisted, being hounded, and being excluded from the media. So there's an uphill struggle to win the hearts and minds of the Taiwanese people. But nevertheless, I think China is doing a good job in winning the hearts and minds of the Taiwanese people. Today, there are over 2 million Taiwanese who are now working in mainland China, and there's about 800,000 Taiwanese businesses that have been established in mainland China, and so all these economic, social, cultural developments are going on. And I think that speaks to China's soft power. And this is why Xi Jinping, the president of China, issued this call for reunification, but for a peaceful reunification. But nevertheless, he says China is determined to reunite with the province of Taiwan. So I guess this is where we are at today. And in terms of provocations and the Western alliance, Canada is part of that. Canada follows in lockstep with the United States when it comes to Taiwan, pretty much.
And you pointed out in a recent article that like the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, establishment think tank, is pushing Taiwanese independence, and there's other forces in this country that see that as a one lever at which they can sort of weaken China, or potentially go all the way to a full throttle conflict, war, if you like, with China. And then I think playing out kind of alongside some of that are things like the RIMPAC war games that are taking place for the past month. They're going on for a couple more days, where handful of Canadian naval vessels are part of it, and then as well as the Canadian naval patrols in the region. There was the dispute over patrol aircraft. There's naval vessels, Canadian naval vessels, running provocative maneuvers, but also the patrol aircraft. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, there was a dispute over the Canadian military accused the Chinese fighter jets of buzzing the Canadian patrol aircraft, and then Trudeau was asked about it, and he condemned the Chinese. And so Canada is militarily involved in sort of stoking some of this, but also at a sort of ideological level, there's forces in this country that are pushing Taiwan independence, as if it's really has like anything to do with. This is the thing about like Pelosi going there. It's like, that, I mean, who are we 7,000-8,000 kilometers away to like get involved in this question? But that mostly is ignored by the dominant media, and it's just understood that we have the right, the U.S. empire and its close associates have the right to intervene. But yeah, so just comment on that question if you would.
Well, what you describe is your classic imperialist colonial thinking in terms of how the Western world thinks about and then approaches and takes action in third world countries, and this time using Taiwan as the leverage or as the pawn against China. And there are some hawks in Canada as well as in the U.S. Who maybe would like to provoke a military confrontation between the U.S. or its Western alliance and China, and in exactly the same way that what happened in Ukraine. The U.S. and the EU have built up a pretty strong military alliance in Europe, Western, Central, and Eastern Europe, and they're doing exactly the same thing, and they want to do exactly the same thing in the Asia Pacific. There were a number of countries who were invited to the last NATO meeting in Madrid. I think Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and one or two others who were Pacific countries, has nothing to do with the North Atlantic, but they were invited to participate in the Madrid NATO meeting. And so it's quite obvious that the Americans and their Western allies are trying to establish an Asia-Pacific military alliance to contain China, and not just China, but also the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And so this RIMPAC war exercise game. I mean, it's been going on since 1971, and it was set up in 71 as an American attempt to bring some of their allies to support them in the war against Vietnam. And Canada was up front, right? Right since 1971. Canada has participated in these biannual war games ever since the beginning. And so this year is the 28th version of it, and Canada is proud to be one of the leaders or co-leaders in the war game exercises. So it's who is running this for Canada? No, we can laugh at Trudeau, but Trudeau is not the one, because I think he's not sophisticated enough, and he's not astute enough he's just the mouthpiece for the military-industrial complex, for the political establishment who are, pushing Canada towards a right-wing agenda, a militaristic agenda. And the MacDonald Laurier Institute is a classic spokes or polemicist for this right-wing agenda that the security establishment, the military establishment, and the military-industrial establishment wants to push Canada towards.
Yeah, well, I think there's a I think a really important point in all this that I think gets lost a little bit, which is the divisions. I think that within the Liberal Party, there's real substantive divisions on China. There is an important segment of corporate Canada that wants to trade and wants to invest in China and make money from that. Right. And like even if you look at like the banning of Huawei, obviously, I think Bell and Telus were pretty harmed by that. Bell and Telus are big companies, right? And so it's really the military, the communications security establishment, CSIS, the arms companies, of course, that those forces that are most tied into the US empire that are the ones really pushing on this. There is significant, important segments of Canadian capital that doesn't want this, that wants just a more sort of economic kind of relationship. There's obviously, there are two minds on some of those dynamics as well. But also, I think one of the distinctions vis-a-vis Ukraine in terms of Canadian policy is the Chinese Canadian community. Unlike on Ukraine, the organized Ukrainian diaspora is very much on board with a sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a nationalistic Ukraine policy, which is getting into a fight with Russia. I don't think that's the case with the Chinese Canadian community. So I think that provides somewhat of a check on Trudeau's aggressiveness on this issue. I mean, it's not, I don't know how big a check, but also kind of alongside or tied into all this, and as part of what I'd like for you to comment on, and there's obviously a lot here, but also, Aaron O'Toole, the leader of the Conservatives, last month, or I guess now in June, so 2 months ago, he said that the Conservatives lost 8 or 9 seats because of Chinese intervention in the election. And I mean, basically what he was saying was that the Chinese government forced Chinese Canadian community to vote against the Conservatives because the Conservatives were more hawkish on China. That's kind of what he's sort of saying. And there's a lot of troubling elements to that statement in terms of kind of stoking xenophobia, stoking racism. There's a kernel of truth, I think, in the fact that there are important elements of the Chinese Canadian community that aren't on board with this sort of hawkish policy, and they see that both they don't like the policy vis-a-vis China, but also they are uncomfortable with how it affects, the racism it stokes, on them, and this whole discussion of like Chinese influence and all this kind of stuff that this is all sort of tied into. But yeah, I just wanted you to, sort of comment on that, or any thoughts on that kind of those kind of divisions and questions.
Yeah, I think you summed it up quite well. I mean, it's pure xenophobia. But in this situation, what O'Toole has done is use the Chinese Canadian community as a scapegoat for him losing. Well, he lost the leadership. Obviously, he lost the elections, and so he's painting the Chinese Canadian community as his scapegoat for losing, for not being in power. If he was in power, he'll probably sing a different tune. But there are Chinese Canadians who have come out, Chinese Canadian conservatives and members of the Conservative Party who have come out to denounce O'Toole, who have come out to oppose Poilievre for his anti-Chinese China stance as well. So the thing I think people don't understand is that the Chinese Canadian community does not have one voice. We are not one big amorphous mass. We're not one big mass with the same thinking, with just one voice, because we're just like any other community in Canada. We have different politics. We have a class structure, like any dominant communities here in Canada. And so you cannot put all the Chinese into one basket. So this is essentially political racial profiling. And those who play this kind of game are going to be, are going to get burnt very quickly, because, given my experience of the head tax redress campaign, the redress Chinese exclusion campaign, we can unite. We can put a lot of pressure on politicians. There's at least 1.5 million, and some people are saying there are 2 million Chinese Canadians in Canada today. But I just want to explain a little bit that there are differences, what the differences are in the Chinese Canadian community. Because my generation, I come from the original pioneer stock. Who came to Canada. My grandfather and my father came to Canada at the turn of the last century. My grandfather came here in 1909, and my father came here in 1921. I think I'm one of the youngest and one of the last survivors of the Chinese Exclusion Act era, because my whole family was affected by the Chinese Exclusion Act. My family was my mother and my father were separated by the Exclusion Act for 30 years. So we have that segment of the Chinese Canadian community, and now we're becoming, third, fourth, fifth generation Chinese Canadians, and so we're pretty much integrated into Canadian society as such. And as such, we also have our own political differences in the same way that Canadian society, anyone in Canadian society has political differences with others. And then you have the British colonial Hong Kong mentality, and they came to Canada prior to 1997, when Hong Kong reverted back to mainland China. And those have, they went through a whole generation or two of British education system, and so they're the ones that are the most adamant in terms of calling for British democracy and British educational system and way of life. And since that time, we have people from mainland China who are immigrating into Canada. And, many of them, or all of them actually, have, at least 20 years of socialist education in China before they came. So some may have turned away from socialism, but they still understand what it means. And so they're the ones that are probably going to become the most militant in terms of defending democracy and defending freedom of speech here in Canada and against racism. Back in 2019, when the so-called progressive Quebec Solidaire Party came out, one of their members of the National Assembly came out to call Chinese farmers predators, saying that we are taking all the land here in Quebec and we're shipping all the produce back to China. The Chinese Canadian community came out in force to denounce this, and we organized a demonstration all the way to the QS headquarters here in Montreal. And to this day, the QS leadership has not apologized, and they have not even acknowledged that this statement by one of the members is in fact racist and stereotypical, and using Chinese Quebecois people as scapegoats for the problems that Quebec farmers may be having. But it's all due to the CAQ government. But they diverted that and scapegoating the Chinese Canadian community, and so this is the nature pretty much of, as I see it, of the Chinese Canadian and Chinese Quebecois community here today.
Okay, well, thanks for that, William. And so I figure at this point we'll open it up to questions and comments. And I see that Laura has go ahead, Laura.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for that, William. I'm just wondering, I always hear this statement that we're trying to contain China, and I'm just wondering what people really mean by that. So in Canada and US and your NATO and them, they're in this containment policy. I mean, they're not talking about just vis-a-vis Taiwan, obviously. What do you think people mean by that, containing China?
Okay, thank you, Laura, for that question. I think, since I'm old enough to go back at least 20 years, there was a China engagement atmosphere, in the early 2000s. And people feel that if we went into China, we help the Chinese economy, we help develop the infrastructure in China, and then the Chinese will see how great we are and how great the democratic Western way of life is. But of course, that didn't work out because the Chinese have their own way of living and their own way of doing things and their own concepts of democracy. And so right after the financial crisis in 2008, and by the way, China helped Obama to get out of that crisis as well with the anyways, it was a convoluted way of engagement at that time. So after that, the Western world realized that they cannot control China, that the Chinese are not listening, and they're not overthrowing the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, and so at that time, China was putting forward its own concept of the international order, and I suppose the Chinese communists, like progressives and leftists in the West, are sort of seeing the decline of the U.S. empire, and that the decline of the U.S. empire may be, have ups and downs as they start declining, and so Obama put in this policy of pivot to Asia, and part of that policy is the containment of China. That is, we have to put a some wrapping paper or saran wrap around China so that the Chinese ideas of a new international world order does not come out, because that would definitely threaten the American world order and the so-called what Trudeau would like to use all the time, the rules-based international order, and so they had to put a containment around China, and I think this is where it started. It started back in about 2012. And today it has really escalated quite a bit because of the fact that I think the U.S. is pretty much on the decline. With people like Trump and Biden, getting to power. Imagine a country of 300-400 million people, and they can't come up with anybody smarter than Trump and Biden to lead the country.
But I should also add to that, if you look at the numbers, it's pretty remarkable numbers of, like, in 2000, the US economy was 5 times, 6 times China's economy. And by 2020, it was basically on par, or 2/3. China was 2/3. So if you look at those numbers, it's a pretty startling rise of China's economic power. And I don't know the full. I mean, there's probably many different thinkings of the full containment, but at its extreme, there's clearly factions of the American military that would like to balkanize China. Of course, that would want to Xinjiang and Tibet, and that there's long histories to some of those things. So that's part of the containment, and then the simple containment is, of course, just having American bases all around, and naval vessels and submarines and all that, where you have the leverage over oil imports, and if you want to push it, you always have that ability to choke the economy by blocking oil imports, or by blocking different exports, etc.
Yeah, I should point out that I was going through the numbers and trying to get exactly the number of U.S. military bases in Asia. And it ranges anywhere between 80 to 120. And within those bases, and I think it's 120 because of Japan has so many bases in Japan that some people may just count it as one, or others may be counted as multiple bases. And there are 80,000 American troops stationed in these bases. And this is just in Asia. And I'm not talking about the rest of the world, because apparently there's about 800 American military bases throughout the world. And so I think Eve brings up a very good point in terms of the numbers, that the Chinese economy was growing in double digits in the early 2000s, up until maybe even Obama years. And then in the 2012 5-year plan, the Chinese 5-year plan, and they still have this 5-year plan. It's a socialist way of developing the economy. And in the 2012 5-year plan, they purposely reduce the growth to switch over from investment to consumption, because they feel that the Chinese people need to consume in order to further develop a better standard of living. And so I guess up until 2020, I believe, China declared that it has wiped out absolute poverty in China. And imagine, in the last 40, 50 years, 800 million people were brought out of poverty, and which is the biggest poverty alleviation campaign in the history of the human race. So these are some things that China has achieved, and now it is spreading and this is what the Americans are afraid of. But it's spreading, and not for in terms of military bases or occupation or colonialism, but it's spreading in order to help other countries, developing countries, to build up their infrastructure through the Road and Belt Initiative, the BRI, which Biden is lamely trying to compete with. But I don't think he's getting any support from his fellow Western powers. So that's where we are, and I think this is one of the reasons why the Americans have to contain China.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Thanks, Eve. Actually, just before I get to my question, somebody in the chat, Eileen Watson, was asking if China still purchases most U.S. treasuries.
Well, I think the Chinese would be stupid if they continue to purchase that. But I think they have a few $1 trillion worth of the treasury bonds. And I don't know what they're going to do with it, because if they cash them in, the American economy will just totally collapse. And so I think this is part of their propping up the American economy.
They can beat the Americans at their own game of capitalism, but
yeah, put sanctions on the Americans. Yeah.
But my question I wanted to ask you, Mr. Dere, and by the way, it's an honor to talk to you voice to voice. I love the work that you, Aiden, the others, and Daniel do at the Canada Files, which I sometimes call you guys, the bad boys of anti-imperialism in Canada.
Yeah, we like to provoke.
Exactly. But the question I wanted to ask you, since Taiwan is since we've been talking about Taiwan, you already talked about how under Chiang Kai-shek there was what was referred to as the White Terror, I believe, when he basically liquidated and committed politicide on anyone who wanted détente with China, anyone who was to the left of Bernie Sanders, or anyone who was, a communist. And then so my question I wanted to ask you is, given Taiwan's very unique history of basically being a breakaway province from China, and it's had its own, unique history when it comes to, its kind of right-wing dictatorship and so forth like that. Once upon a time was part of, the kind of international imperial system, and now it's in this weird, sort of quasi state where you have some Taiwanese people who actually would be open to being reunified, but you have others who want Taiwan to remain independent. Isn't the best way forward, since we're part of anti-imperialist movements that want détente with China so that we don't die from nuclear war and and can hopefully fix the climate crisis or give the Earth's lifespan? Isn't the best way forward when it comes to Taiwan that the Taiwanese themselves just have a referendum, a very democratic referendum, and if they choose to remain an independent country, okay, but then they have to have a non-aggression pact with China, not have a military or foreign bases, kind of like what Finland had with Russia. Or if a majority of Taiwanese and the expat communities wants to be reunified with China, then okay, then that's fine too. And whether how much autonomy they get and anything and everything is a matter for the Taiwanese and China to sort out. So I want your response on that, but then also to clarify, the fact that a lot of Taiwanese, when they do talk about independence, it's actually a much more of a sinister thing because they think of themselves as the original People's Republic of China. So,
yeah, Yuri. First of all, this term "breakaway province," I don't think it has really broken away. It's just that it's never. It's always been there, and it's a term used by I guess by the Western media as a way of splitting or of breaking away. But anyway, I think this yes, you're right. There was the White Terror, and there were many journalists who were executed and killed for opposing the KMT at that time. And the KMT, the Kuomintang, was in power for, I don't know, up until what? Up until the 90s, up until 2000, I think. And they may still come back to power. And I think the Chinese view negotiating with the KMT would be preferable to negotiating with the DPP, which is the Democratic Progressive Party. And the DPP has also various factions within it. Some want outright independence, some don't, and there's also a faction that wants reunification. And the DPP is a pretty wishy-washy party, similar to the NDP here in Canada in terms of its wishy-washiness. But anyway, so if the KMT ever gets reelected, and which is possible because I think the present government in Taiwan only, well, I guess they got over 50% of the votes, but the KMT wasn't that far behind. So so I think what you're referring to is and what I mentioned in my article that Eve brought up is that in a June, a couple of months ago in June, there was a poll that was taken, and in that poll, over 80% of those people who were polled supported the status quo. That is what the Americans refer to as strategic ambiguity, because people know that they are occurring disaster if they declare independence, because China has already stated that they will not allow Taiwan to become independent, no matter how much the Americans want it. And also there's it's only a small fraction of people who want outright independence. In that poll, I think if I can bring up the numbers here, I think 5.1% of those that were polled wanted outright independence. So so a very small minority of Taiwanese want outright independence. And so in my opinion, the best approach is the Hong Kong approach, minus the the riots of 2019, is to have one country, two systems. And I think this is probably where the Chinese government would probably go as well, given the fact that this cross-strait economic cooperation is very strong these days. Like I said earlier, there are over 2 million Taiwanese who are actually working in China because they find better opportunities and better promotion and higher pay by finding jobs in China. And there's 800,000 Taiwanese businesses that have been set up in China. And so over the years, through this process of mutual economic cooperation and benefit, and culturally, you have Taiwanese artists, films, singers, and so on, who cross back and forth over the strait. And so culturally, economically, socially, they're families. I mean, there are at least a couple of million Taiwanese who have family back in mainland China. So you have the social, cultural, and economic links that could develop into a peaceful reunification. And I think that's probably the best scenario for everyone concerned.
Oh, and very quickly, if I can, is that okay, Eve?
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then just very quickly, can you explain to people how the folks that the imperialists in the West are supporting in Taiwan are actually supporting the most reactionary elements of Taiwanese independence, because the sort of old guard of like Chiang Kai-shek, they think of themselves as the real Chinese government, as a government in exile, and therefore when they talk about independence, they mean them sort of having power back throughout all of China. And yeah, and I was wondering if you could clarify that, because a comrade of mine, Fiona, was explain that to me when I interviewed her on my program on all things China.
Yeah, well, the old guard, the OG, the Kuomintang, it's not the same Kuomintang as people in the West think it is, because within this Kuomintang, there are various forces, and I think there are forces who are very strongly in favor of reunification under the one country, two systems concept. And don't forget, historically, the Kuomintang was not, a totally united force. The Kuomintang had anti-Japanese elements that formed a united front with the Chinese Communist Party, and they fought against Japan. And Chiang Kai-shek tried to eliminate that faction through executions and so on. And even when it went into Taiwan during the White Terror, they were trying to eliminate the pro-unification forces within the Kuomintang during those years as well. So, but like I said, peacefully and through persuasion, through the march of history, I think the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, are willing to be patient in trying to develop a peaceful reunification. Although the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, was able to speak out recently, and under this provocation from Pelosi, that they will not let stand if Pelosi sets foot on Taiwan soil.
So thanks for that, William, and thanks everyone. We're at an hour. I think that to me, one of the main things that needs to be brought out in this kind of discussion is that literally the last country in the world that should be involved in this process is the U.S. government, right? Like Canada's maybe just a couple steps behind that. Britain's maybe right after the U.S. But like literally, if there's going to be Morocco and Brazil and the Congo should be more involved in any of these sort of discussions or negotiations or any of this kind of stuff before Washington and Ottawa should be. And I think that kind of stuff is really important always to keep in mind when looking at something like this, and of course the fact that war is always better than no war, right? But yeah, so I if there's no more comments or questions, I thanks everyone for coming, and thanks William for the stimulating discussion, and yeah, next week. Same time, same place.
Thank you, Eve.
Thanks for
Bye.
Take care.
To the people, to the warmongers.
Yeah.